Hi, everyone, and welcome to CAF's Approaching Corporate Relationship with Confidence webinar. I'm Laura Yonish. I'm Client Experience Lead for Charities and Individuals here at CAF, and I'll be guiding us through today's session to squeeze as much knowledge and insight as possible into the next 50 minutes or so. It's really fantastic to see such a full house of charities and social purpose organisations joining us today to hear how corporate giving has performed over the last year and where we may be heading in the future. Many of you will already be familiar with CAF, also known as the Charities Aid Foundation, but for anyone less familiar, our mission is simple: to accelerate progress in society towards a fair and sustainable future for all. We work at the heart of the giving ecosystem, supporting donors, businesses, and social purpose organisations so that funding, expertise, and impact flow where it can make the biggest difference. And a vital part of achieving that mission is through the research we produce. Good decisions rely on good evidence, and our research reports help to understand how and why people and organisations give, and how the giving landscape is evolving year on year. We design our research to inform the sector, to shape philanthropic strategy, and ultimately strengthen the culture of giving across our society. So the CAF Corporate Giving Report 2025 is a really key part of that work. It shines a light on the latest trends in corporate giving, how businesses are engaging with social impact, the challenges businesses are facing, and the opportunities that lie ahead. It's designed to give all of us, as fundraisers, leaders, and sector advocates, the insights that we need to build more effective partnerships for social good, as well as providing a set of recommendations for businesses, policymakers, standards bodies, and charities as to how we can navigate the changing environment of corporate giving and find opportunities to grow and diversify this ecosystem together. So with that context in mind, I'm really delighted to introduce our panel, who will unpack this year's findings and explore what they mean for the future of corporate charity collaboration. So first, Catherine Mahoney, Senior Research and Insights Manager here at CAF, and one of the driving forces behind the creation of our annual corporate giving report. Kat is a seasoned professional in research and insights management, having worked in the field for almost 2 decades. We're also joined by Amy Ross, Senior Advisor within CAF's Impact Accelerator team. Amy has worked in the charity sector for over 15 years, including as a fundraiser and CFO. She's now a senior advisor in our Impact Accelerator team, advising funders on impactful giving and charities on a range of topics, including fundraising. And we're thrilled to be joined by Joanna Freeborough, Senior Corporate Partnerships Manager at Trussell. Many of you will already know that Trussell is an anti-poverty charity and community of food banks. They work together to ensure no one in the UK needs a food bank to survive, while providing emergency food and practical support for people left without enough money to live on. Together, Trussell supports 1,400 food banks locations, made possible by 36,000 volunteers, 12,000 churches, hundreds of thousands of community groups and schools, and millions of people around the UK. In the last year, food banks in the Trussell community gave out nearly 2.9 million emergency food parcels, over 1 million of which went to children. Jo herself has worked in the corporate partnerships team at Trussell for the last 4 years and is now responsible for leading the team, managing some incredible partnerships with supermarkets and household brands. Thanks all three of you for joining us today. We'll kick off the session with an overview of the key findings from this year's report presented by Kat, and then move on to a discussion with Amy and Jo on what these trends mean for the charity sector and how they play into our day-to-day work. We'll also bring the report's charity recommendations to life with practical examples to help you approach and maintain your corporate relationships with confidence, whatever your organisation's size, cause area, or stage of development. We'll also leave time for questions at the end, so please do drop any queries or reflections into the Zoom Q&A function, which is just at the bottom of your screen as we go, and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the session today. And just quickly before I hand over to Kat, we thought that in the spirit of all things research and keeping our finger on the sector pulse, we'd run a quick poll ourselves as you registered for the webinar about the types of corporate support your organisations have been receiving recently. What I'm really pleased to say is that over 80% of our participants here today have received some level of corporate backing over the past year, including 34% of you who have received a mix of support through cash, gifts in kind, and employee volunteering. So it's really a brilliant reminder that despite some of the challenging headlines we're becoming used to these days, actually social purpose organisations continue to benefit from the efforts of businesses and the really committed individuals within them. So without further ado, I will hand over to Kat to take us through this year's corporate research findings. Thanks, Kat.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. I'm Kat. I've been a researcher at CAF for a number of years now. I'm going to provide a bit of context for the discussion that Laura and Amy and Joe are going to have by sharing some of the highlights from our recent corporate giving report. This is a report that we've published on and off for a decade or so now. It started out looking at donations just by FTSE 100 companies, but in recent years we've broadened that out to cover the whole business sector. So I'm going to take you through some of those findings, and then my colleagues on the call will really dig into what charities can do with this information and how you can build those corporate relationships. So let's look at the headlines. What we're going to look at on this slide is our estimate of the total amount given by all UK businesses. So just to kind of explain, to measure giving, we've used a framework developed by an organisation called B4SI, which stands for Business for Social Impact, which you might have heard of. In that definition of corporate giving, we are including cash giving, in-kind giving, for example, products, the cash equivalent of employee volunteering time, and any other costs or programme management costs. We have excluded from our calculations social tariffs that are paid by utility companies, or anything sort of mandatory or statutory, for example, sometimes applies to, for example, gambling companies. We've also excluded anything that the employee alone gives. So employee fundraising is out, payroll giving is out, but matched giving is included. And then finally, we've excluded money raised only by companies. So, spare change in a bucket at a supermarket, for example, doesn't count either. Okay, so let's look at the numbers. So first up, the first number we're going to look at is the total donated by Britain's largest listed company, the FTSE 100, which is 1.85 billion. Actually, this number is not really an estimate, it's more of a census, because last few years we've been working with an ex-Sunday Times journalist who does much of the research that sits behind this particular number, and he's talked to almost every FTSE 100 company to really drill down into their giving and get to that number. Next, we have our estimate of giving among the wider business community. So these are companies that have a turnover of at least 250,000 right up to big business, and there are nearly 1 million of those in the country. And this is an estimate. This is based on polling of a representative sample of those businesses, which we've then projected up to the whole of the business population. And then finally, we've made an estimate for the remaining much smaller businesses with a turnover under 250,000, and there are nearly 5 million of those in the UK. We didn't survey them, but we have used the assumption that they sort of donate at the same rate and to the same degree as the wider business community, and we're putting the estimate there at 206 million annually to charities. So excuse me, I've had a cold, so I sound a bit croaky. I do apologise. In total, then, we are estimating that businesses gave in 2024 £4.26 billion. So last year's figure was 4.29 billion. So year on year, well within the margin of error. It's basically flat, which maybe doesn't sound so bad, but taking a longer term view, it is a worrying trend, because we know, for example, with FTSE donations that we have been tracking for a long time, actually they're very flat over a decade. So what this means is, unfortunately, although the sum given has stayed the same, the inflation means that the impact of that sum is diminishing over time. So what we're looking at on this slide is FTSE 100 giving only, because we haven't been tracking those wider business numbers for long enough yet. Although giving has stayed pretty much exactly the same, which you can see there in the green boxes along that bottom line of the chart, actually, when you take inflation into account, that's 185 million less in real terms just since 2022. Thanks, Ellie. So is it all right to bring up the chart? Thank you. So here we're looking at how businesses give. So on the left two columns, we have FTSE 100 giving in 2023 and 24. And in the right two columns, we have the same thing for the rest of the business community. So just as a reminder, we're looking at the donations in cash, donations in kind, the cash equivalent of employee volunteer time, and any sort of other costs or program management costs. So how do businesses give? Excuse me. And the answer is increasingly not in cash. This applies to both groups, but particularly to the wider business community, which saw a big drop in cash giving from 42% of the total to 34% over the space of a year. So we think that means around £300 million less cash went to charities last year. Instead, companies seem to be shifting to more in-kind donations, often of products that the companies produce. Certainly that's the case of the FTSE. Obviously, there are lots of ways that businesses can support charities, and they are all important. But I think the thing to highlight here is that when you talk to corporate funders, if it is capacity building or resilience building that actually is what you really need, have a think about how you can articulate the importance of unrestricted cash funding and how that really still drives impact. So we can look next at the potential for corporate giving, which is, I think probably enormous, really. So at CAF, we've long promoted 1% as the minimum amount of pre-tax profits that we think a socially responsible company ought to be giving. The graphic that's shown on the slide is showing the big numbers that we saw earlier from those three business segments. So the FTSE, sort of 250,000 up, and then those kind of micro companies. And we've applied our 1% rule to each of those to show what the potential could be. And that's the numbers in the third column under potential giving. The upshot is that corporate giving could more than double. And this is just companies that already giving that bit more. So it's not even including companies that don't currently give, which, by the way, is most of them. We're not actually expecting this to happen in real life. And there are companies that do very well on this 1% target already, even smashing it. So, for example, Sainsbury's last year gave more than 10% of its pre-tax profit away. But I think it just gives a flavour of how much potential support there might be there if we can just tap into it. Thanks, Ellie. So we've seen maybe what the Holy Grail looks like, and I mentioned that most companies don't give. In actual fact, 3/4 of businesses that we surveyed are not supporting charities at all in any way, which is kind of astonishing. But I don't think we need to be too depressed about it, because the reasons that they gave for not donating are not really related to budgets. They're more related to that they haven't really thought about it. So we had answers like, which you can see on that chart there, no charities have asked us for support. So 19% of survey respondents said that. That's basically 1 in 5, you could say, of those 900 odd thousand businesses in the UK whose main reason was, well, no one's asked. Other answers included, we didn't really consider it. It's not a priority at the moment. We didn't have time to find a suitable charity. They're all, there might all be valid reasons for not having given up to now or not giving at the moment, but they definitely don't preclude giving in the future. So we know from other research that we do with individual donors that people tend to give when they are asked. Businesses are just groups of individuals. I think it's a fair assumption that if asked in the right way, there might well be a positive response. So my colleagues will be talking about the best way to have those conversations with corporates, but I think the point here to make is that I suspect there's probably quite a lot of low-hanging fruit if you can make it super easy for that business and target one where you know your purposes will really nicely align. Yeah, so companies obviously will have their own reasons for giving to do with their purpose, for example. I think what I wanted to highlight here is that this stuff does matter to employees. 70% said it's important for their employer to address social challenges. When you're talking to a corporate funder, obviously the impact that your charity has is your USP. And I think part of that impact can be around that engagement opportunity for employees. And it's important to communicate that because corporate giving is a win-win situation. And then just a last slide from me. We looked a little bit into how place factors into those decisions around which charities to support. Got a picture of the angel here because businesses in the northeast were the most likely to give to charity and also the most likely to give in cash. Businesses in the southeast outside of London were the least likely to do either of those things. London was kind of somewhere in the middle. Around half of FTSE companies said explicitly that they were supporting causes in places where they have operations, and actually only a handful said place didn't come into it at all. So, I guess the takeaway is it's important to be aware of the breadth of businesses in your local area because, they do want to be working with organisations that align with them well and are having impact on the places where they are embedded. So that's it from me. Just a sort of a short tour through that. And I'll hand back to Laura to start to reflect on what we've just seen.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Kat, for that whistle-stop tour of such an important piece of research. I'm sure for many of you, it's already got the cogs whirring. So just a really quick reminder to please keep adding your questions in the Q&A function for the end of the session. And also just to make you aware that we'll be sending out a link to the report at the end of the session too. So there's so much more information and data to dip into. We'd love to engage with you on that as well. So it will be coming your way straight after this session. And so many of those data points that I think Kat has raised will likely resonate with all of us. It's no secret that we're operating in a challenging environment where charities are being called on to do so much more with a lot less, and businesses are also acting with increased financial caution. That's really reflected in the continued shift towards employee volunteering and in-kind support versus a decline in cash giving and unrestricted income, which we know is so important for the sector. Having said that, it's encouraging to see businesses recognising the value of giving in order to drive impact, and that many companies are planning to increase their engagement in the year ahead. So hopefully we're being told that there's opportunity here for us to harness, which is what we'll be exploring next with Jo and Amy. So thank you, Jo, Amy, for joining us. And Jo, I wondered if I could come to you first. How does this research and our charity recommendations resonate with you and your experience of corporate relationships over the past year? Are you noticing a particular shift in opportunity towards the importance of localized support and customer engagement as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Laura. And yeah, thank you, Kat, as well, for taking us through that research. I know I found it really interesting and useful to kind of take a look at the total sector and think about what we're seeing at Trussell and what we're experiencing as part of a wider trend. So really appreciate the work that has gone into all of the report and research. To answer the first bit of your question, I think at Trussell, we are really fortunate to work closely with a number of corporate partners and relationships who have been supporting our work for a long time. So in the same way that they have helped us weather storms such as COVID and the cost of living crisis in recent years, it's also really important that we're able to recognise the context that those businesses are operating in and when that context changes or becomes harder. So I think for Trussell, what we've seen over the last 12 months or so is a number of restructures or potential budget cuts and changes in our corporate partners, which can change the way that we work together for a time, whether that's the size of the team that we're working with or the financial support that is available as reflected in your report. But I think when I really think about the partnerships we have, we're certainly not seeing a change in the intent or the desire to support our work. What it means is it's really important to identify where the mutual opportunities to work together are, and what resource, just being really honest about what resource is available, both from a funding and from a people power point of view. So what's available and how might it be best used to hit on everybody's objectives and goals out of a partnership. But then I think, yeah, this slide here, the local impact one, is super interesting. It's certainly something we have been seeing and hearing from our partners a lot, and I know there's some questions in the chat about it as well. Something we talk a lot about at Trussell, and I know you did a bit of a Trussell 101 at the start there. So something we talk about a lot is how our structure really supports us to be able to talk not only about local impact, but also national scale. And that's because thanks to the community of food banks that we work with and support, we're able to collect insight and data and stories from all across the UK that we're able to kind of aggregate and talk to our funders about whether they are interested in that kind of localization of a message and impact, or whether they then want the kind of national picture as well. So I suppose that's a little bit about the Trussell angle on things. But when I think about that insight and the importance of kind of a local focus more broadly, I think it makes a lot of sense for the corporates. Having a local focus allows them to prioritize and be really efficient with the investments that they are able to make. And it also enables them to talk about the impact that they're having in a local area to people, probably their employees and customers who live in that area. It also can smooth the way for kind of options that diversify and broaden your partnership, like employee engagement opportunities and volunteering. And I know a lot of that was captured in your research as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Jo. And I think you're absolutely right in that kind of that symbiotic relationship of being able to see the fruits of your labour, and how that we can think about in a national and an international context, but how we bring it to life locally as well. Mm-hmm. So as we mentioned earlier, in each of our research reports, we provide some high-level recommendations to charities, to donors and policymakers to suggest how we can build on this research and improve the giving landscape. So for today's session, what we've aimed to do is taken this year's charity recommendations and work to turn them into a tangible structure to create the best chances for corporate success. So we've created the 4 W's that we feel you should be considering when thinking about how to prepare and plan with confidence in your organisation. And these are what, who, why, and which. So we'll be taking each of these headings into the next session and unpacking each of these elements to share why we feel these are so important. So without further ado, I think we should kick off with what. And Amy, I'll come to you if that's all right. So a key part of CAF's advisory work with social purpose organisations centres on the ways in which teams can feel empowered to articulate their case for support to prospects and to propositions. How can charities go about identifying what they need specifically from their corporate relationships?
Yeah, thanks, Laura, and great to have everyone on the call today. And so clarity is really key when thinking about engaging with a new corporate partner, or indeed an existing corporate partner. And having a really clear pitch for what you need will help you go into that conversation on a really strong footing. For those that are starting out on this journey or relatively new, or anyone thinking about a new corporate relationship, it's a really great starting point is to develop a specific case for support for your audience. So that should include a really clear statement around the problem that you exist to solve. So why do you exist in the world? How do you go about solving that problem, and what's unique about your particular solution? What kind of support you need and why? And the slide here shows some of the things that might be on offer from a corporate partner, bearing in mind that what they have to offer may not always align with what you would prefer. So there may be some negotiation in there and some kind of an evolution of that relationship. And then really crucially, how does this case for support relate to your audience and what they will want from the relationship? For example, what are their key drivers that are bringing them to the table? Is it around employee engagement, having a tangible impact locally, which we've heard is really important, helping them to achieve their business values and goals, So understanding that as much as you can in advance is key. And the sweet spot of a charity corporate relationship is finding that shared value in between where both parties can come away with a win. But you can only get to that sweet spot if you're really clear in advance about what that means for you. So doing that upfront thinking is going to really increase your chances of success and making this a fruitful partnership.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. And Jo, I know that Trussell have had some really wonderful successes in bringing your mission to life in order to develop those deeply aligned and long-lasting corporate relationships. And I can see some questions coming in around how do you make those sort of one-off engagements turn into long-term relationships. So I was wondering if you could share a couple of examples of how you've successfully articulated your needs to your partners, and especially when those needs actually might go beyond what your organisation is sort of typically known for.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, to start, I suppose I really agree with everything Amy's said and talked through on this slide. And I think that's such a great starting point, kind of wherever you are in your charity journey. And even if you think you might have this, worth refreshing and keeping it really live and up to date. And then I suppose when you're then looking at the approach, an additional thing that I would add is how important it is to find kind of a sweet spot between what you are looking for and how you've really clearly defined that through this process. The sweet spot and alignment between that and what a corporate might be able to provide. And I think that's where at Trussell we've seen that balance. When we can find that balance, that's when we really can develop past maybe an initial scope of work or proposal and embed into kind of longer term partnerships. But yeah, I suppose in terms of some examples that might not be typically what Trussell is known for. So obviously we do have some really amazing food-based partnerships that hopefully I'll get some time to chat about later. But I wanted to highlight here some of the amazing relationships we have with telecommunications companies as well, so such as Vodafone and Tesco Mobile. And these are an example of where a relationship was really born out of that sweet spot and overlap. I'm kind of thinking of a Venn diagram between our two organizations' goals. So we had an insight through some of our own research that poverty, we know that poverty and food bank use is not driven simply by a lack of food, but it's driven by a lack of income. And when someone doesn't have enough money to afford the essentials that we all need to get by, that's when they turn to a food bank. So within that essentials bucket, obviously, yes, it's food, but it could be clothing, heating, housing, travel, and connectivity. And that insight itself, we really tried to dig into. We had further research that showed digital isolation can actually exacerbate social isolation and hardship. So 1 in 7 people referred to a Trussell food bank had no access whatsoever to the internet. And so that insight gave us a really strong foundation to approach these organizations and have conversations about what we could do together to align our work and have an impact really directly on connectivity and digital exclusion. So I think that was, like I say, a founding insight, and delivering that enabled us to deliver on our goals and on their goals as well, to get that alignment in what we were both looking for.
Amazing. Thank you, Jo. And actually, I think that leads us on really nicely to our next W, because another key area of the relationship process, which is obviously that once fundraisers feel confident in articulating what the need is, how can we then identify who can help us achieve it? So where does that alignment really stem from? And so, Amy, when we're sort of thinking about the types of organisations that charities feel could further their mission, what are the most important things to bear in mind in that decision-making process?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's really important to think strategically about who you approach. Your time and resources are really limited, as we all know. And as we've just heard, the pool of corporate donors and the amount of funding available is quite stagnant. So doing lots of thinking up front about specifically who you will target is really important. And the more strategic and targeted you can be, the better your chances of success. I just want to say I love that example that Jo just gave, that this was less about kind of Trussell as a whole brand, but something very, very specific, a very specific bit of insight that you had around people's needs that helped you to identify which corporate would be the right partner for that. And it's that really targeted, very kind of laser focus on alignment that's going to be really key. Relationships are really key with any type of donor. A tool that we use with lots of our charity clients is network mapping, just to kind of get you thinking about who you can target. Ultimately, you want to work with organisations that have really clear shared values with your own, but it can be tricky to find that kind of information out on the internet. So thinking about who is in your network, what companies they work for, and see what inside information you can get about the organisations in your ecosystem and get that foot in the door, which can then grow on to being something around values alignment. Obviously, it's Trustee Week, so if you're a trustee on this call wondering how you can help your charity with their corporate engagement, this could be a role for you, thinking about who's in your network and maybe supporting other trustees around the table to do that exercise with you. As we've heard, giving locally is a really key driver for lots of corporates. So researching organisations local to you is a really good starting point if you're very, very early on this journey. And once you have that foot in the door, you can start exploring things like values and shared purpose to see if there is the kind of alignment that could help you go the distance with that corporate. And local can mean local impact, but it can also just be the organisations on your street that will want to really invest in local relationships. And you can give them that really targeted and bespoke relationship that you can only do as a local organisation.
Amazing, thank you, Amy. And it's all those words about like shared value, shared impact, you know, that collaborative nature of relationships that makes them really stick and sort of drive that really key impact that we're looking for. So I can only imagine, Jo, that this must be a discussion that comes up for you and your team so often around not just identifying, but then also maintaining that alignment over long-term partnerships. So I suppose, what kind of role does value alignment play in your approach to corporate relationships, and how does that play out in practice as well?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. That's a great question, and absolutely. I mean, values alignment is the foundation of all the relationships we build. I would argue that's true inside of work and out. But you know, with a work hat on, it's true for whether we're talking about relationships with funders, with agencies, media organizations, or other charities. I think the value alignment has to be there and is a really key thing to focus on. So for us, it starts from the very beginning when we're talking to a possible new partner or corporate relation. And I think I've got some colleagues on the call who do an amazing job of carrying out that kind of initial due diligence process. So talking really practically now, we have a process to ensure that a partner is aligned to our values, and to assess any complications or possible risks that might arise. And I think that's part of a proper review and onboarding process as well for both sides. But from my point of view, like I said, I work in the part of our Trussell team that look after kind of developing and growing our existing relationships, and so maintaining that value alignment over time is a really big part of what we do. It means we have to have really clearly defined and agreed sets of values that can be kind of a touch point that you continue to come back to together over time. And I think agreeing a process for doing that and for reviewing the partnership is really important to maintain that kind of shared understanding of what you're working towards. It gives you space to celebrate the wins, to demonstrate the impact that your partnership is having and a funder is having with you. And it also does give, you know, space for both sides to share if something doesn't quite feel aligned, if something's a bit off track, as well. You can course correct together. So I think ultimately where we can, we always aim to have this really deep alignment and building understanding over time. And where we can, we leverage that alignment into multi-year commitments of support as well, which I think is really important to call out here when we have that deep alignment, if possible. So just then to maybe get a bit practical, as an example of how we do this in our existing relationships, one of a number of big priorities for Trussell in our values and how we approach partnership work is to make sure that we're working and supporting with people who have lived experience of poverty and food bank use, and so making sure that their voices are the ones that are leading and shaping the work that Trussell does. So in terms of our corporate relationships, that means that we work with kind of a panel of lived experience experts to make sure all of our messaging and the portrayals of people facing hardship are done with dignity, and compassion. And just to make sure that we're not accidentally playing into any harmful stereotypes, for example. So yeah, that means we can work with workshops and panel groups. We're also able to kind of facilitate lunch and learn sessions or talks with individuals who have that experience, together with corporates and their employees. And it can be, those values can really end up being a tool to deepen the wider engagement and understanding of our work across an organization. So yeah, I think that's just some of the ways in which we kind of work on values alignment, and I believe it really does enhance and make a deeper connection through our work.
And I can imagine it's so important to get that balance right, as you said, from the outset, so everyone knows where they stand and you know how the relationship is formed, but also to have those regular checkpoints and those maintenance moments to make sure you're all fully aligned on the same journey, both internally proving the mission as well as kind of funding and supporting it. So yeah, I think that's it's so vital to have that open communication on both sides of the coin. And I think what that sort of talks to me or says to me as well, Joe, is around the power of storytelling, of really being able to drive the mission forwards through bringing it to life. And Amy, I was hoping to come to you. So, you know, we all are aware in our roles of the power of storytelling in order to bring our supporters on the impact journey with us. But when considering a corporate audience, I think defining and evidencing impact in a really coherent way over a long term can be quite tricky, as well as sort of really hitting that impact moment right from the very beginning of a relationship. How would you suggest that charities can do this in a way that's impactful without being too resource intensive? And I can see in the chat that a lot of the people on the call are sort of saying we want to do this, but resources stretched. How can we do this in sort of with the shape of organization that we have now?
Yeah, absolutely. It should, you know, we're all impact-oriented organisations, and it should be easy, but we know that it is often challenging to really articulate what that impact is. And a tool that we really advocate for at CAF is the theory of change. It doesn't have to be hugely complicated, and actually sometimes simple is better, but it can really help you to identify the link between your activities and the impact you have, and draw out those key KPIs that tell your impact story. And it's just the key here is simplicity and clarity. Absolutely, you just want to be able to tell a really clear, straightforward story to your corporate. And as Laura mentioned, there are a lot of audiences here to think about. There's the corporate organisation themselves, but there's their audiences, so their customers, their employees, their stakeholders. Your job is to make your impact story as clear as possible for your corporate partners so that they can share it onwards to their stakeholders, potentially maximizing your reach with their networks. But that clarity and that simplicity, you know, I think theory of changes back in the day used to be slightly unwieldy documents. I think now we're really looking for something that's really clear and really concise and just says, how does your activity relate to the impact that you have in a way that's easily communicable and understandable for a corporate audience.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I know, Joe, from our discussions previously, that impact measurement is something that your team spends a lot of time working on with your corporate relationships. How do you evidence the way in which impact is being achieved through your partnerships? And if you could give us a bit of an idea about where you've been most successful in really embedding your mission with a corporate relationship, but, you know, as Amy said, with their employees and with their customers as well, so that everyone feels kind of a shared ownership and pride in that impact with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this question, and I'll I'm happy to dive into quite a specific example. If it feels too Trussell, then I'll keep an eye for questions in the chat as well, and I'd love to kind of broaden it out a little bit. But I suppose at Trussell, we, given our structure supporting kind of a community of food banks across the UK, we are able to collect very robust and detailed data from those food banks. So, for example, they report to us on parcel numbers, so kind of a sense of the level of need that they're seeing in their communities. And they also report to us on donation weight, so generally speaking, level of support or gifting kind support that they're receiving. So we're able to aggregate that up centrally and build a really clear picture of the need for food bank use kind of at a national level, but also drilling down into a local level. So that's a very privileged position for us to be in, and I'm aware I've dived into kind of an answer around data when thinking about impact, but I'd really encourage a way of thinking about impact that could be lots of other routes, which I'll come to. But just to give an example, one way where we've been able to really clearly articulate impact and embed it into a partnership in a way that that does feel like we have joint ownership and joint pride over the impact is with our relationship with Tesco. So there's lots of elements to our partnership with Tesco. One of the key things is that they're a long-standing partnership, and we've worked with them for over a decade. And each year they run a winter food collection event in support of Trussell and FareShare. Some of you might be aware of this. It's coming up at the end of November, so I'd encourage you to keep an eye out. But the event itself runs in stores. It's a food drive that runs in store, and it is a crucial moment for the food banks in our community to collect donations and raise awareness in their local communities ahead of Christmas. And so it's we really do see it as a lifeline, that event. And I think the impact, therefore, is very tangible and really quite immediate. Again, at a local level, which I know I've mentioned a few times, but also kind of that broader visibility too. But I think on top of the immediate impact of those donations, having that regular annual event really gives us a hook or a moment in the year where we're able to build that storytelling and that narrative of impact with Tesco colleagues too. Tesco employees, they call them colleagues, are encouraged to sign up every year to volunteer, to be in store over the Christmas period and support their store colleagues. And so many people across Tesco end up having kind of hands-on interaction with our work, with our volunteers, and with food banks in their community. And that can be incredibly impactful for an individual who's spending a couple of hours or a day in store over Christmas. But it can also be really impactful for the messages and the stories and the thanks from food banks that we're able to share as well. Not least to come back to the data and talk about how we're able to kind of aggregate up the amount of food that is donated and how you played a part in that kind of wider picture and a sense of momentum that people do feel really proud of. So I think that's a really lovely example and one that has been so well embedded thanks to the help of our Tesco partners. And then again, I know I've talked a lot about employees there, but I'd also think about the impact that you can communicate to corporate customers as well, if that makes sense. So, for example, talking about Tesco, their customers, it's so important that we're able to evidence and explain why their help and the fact that they're adding an item of food to donate as part of their shop, why that is part of a bigger piece of work to support people facing hardship, not only in the short term, but also in the longer term, so that they don't need to return to a food bank again, and being able to land those messages with customers as kind of a whole other audience is a different type of impact again. So I suppose, then I know that was a very specific example, but to take a step back, I think what I would say is it's really important to think about how you communicate impact. It might be for your immediate relationship or stakeholder, they've got a report, they need data, they need numbers, or it's something quite in depth. But it could be something a bit more light touch than that. It could be, the stories of impacts that you're able to tell, the quotes that you're able to provide. So think about how you communicate impact, think about when, and think about who to, because there's actually quite a few different audiences that would need different levels of detail, but it's all kind of part of that total ecosystem of building the why that support should continue.
Amazing. Thanks, Jo. And it feels really what we're sort of getting at is how do you make the macro feel personal? You know, how do you make the scale of impact and those data points feel really personal as well? Thank you so much. I'm very conscious of time and I want to make sure we can fit in a question or two from you guys as well. Thank you for sending things in, and please know that we will aim to get back to you personally after this if we can't go through all the questions today. We've kept a note of them. But I just very quickly wanted to come back to Amy. So I know that we've spent a lot of time here sharing so many wonderful tips and ideas for how charities can approach and grow corporate relationships. But are there any sort of really key points that you would say the nuts and bolts infrastructure elements that charities should think about when implementing corporate relationships? I know a lot of charities have been saying in the Q&A around how do we fit this into our structure today?
Yeah, of course. And so we've talked a lot about kind of strategies and tactics for engaging with corporates, but underpinning all of that is really your core internal infrastructure. As charities, we know that this starts with our people. So thinking really about the skills and capacity in your team, and then about your operating systems and processes for tracking relationships, managing donations, clarifying your offer, the policies that need to sit around, you know, whether it's safeguarding or employee engagement. So that's really key, that infrastructural piece, and that's going to give you a really great foundation for all of those tactics and strategies we've talked about. Just as a final thought, if you're an organisation, and I've seen in the chat, there are some organisations I think that are fairly small or maybe thinking about this as their first kind of corporate engagement, wondering how to get started. Do think about this piece really carefully around the internal infrastructure and the systems and capacity that you have, and whether corporate fundraising is the right path for you. There is definitely an opportunity here for some charities with corporate partners, but it does require an investment of time and resources. It can take a while to get established. This doesn't happen overnight. And with limited resources and finite time, it's really important for you to think carefully about whether this is the best use of your fundraising capacity based on the kind of organisation you are and the team and the resources that you have. And hopefully this has given you some food for thought if that is where you are at as an organisation, and help with your decision making. But just know that we understand this isn't right for everyone. And if there are other more kind of aligned fundraising streams for you, do pursue those, focus where you're going to have the best chance of success. But hopefully this has given you some food for thought to think through that decision making.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Amy. And I'm very conscious of time. I know that we've said 50 minutes and it flies when you're talking about corporate success. If you do need to jump off now, we appreciate your time. If you have a couple of minutes to stay, I'd love just for us to go through one or two questions. If you do need to jump off, don't fear, we will be sending a recording of this of this webinar out afterwards, so you can catch up on the next sort of 5 minutes or so. But I would just love to pose a couple of your questions to Jo, Amy and Kat now. So one kind of open to the panel. I think this came up quite early in the conversation. I found it fascinating. Someone said, can it be a hindrance if we're too specific on our ask to corporates? So, for example, if we outline exactly what we would like, could that result in a straight no and rule out discussions around alternative support? So, Jo, I don't know if you've had experience of that. Obviously, we want to ensure that we can be quite strategic, but does that mean it's easier for companies to say thanks, but no thanks?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I can understand the position it's coming from as well. I think, it was the first point we talked about on this panel. Defining the what of what you're looking for is so important. And I think being specific and being clear is only ever a good thing. I think the note of caution or the bit on whether it can be a hindrance is looking at your really clearly defined what, and then adding some level of personalization or within whatever's possible for your organization at whatever scale, thinking what could we also offer? Not only what do we need, but what could we offer? And kind of asking some of those fact-finding questions, like what is it that a corporate is looking for out of a partnership? I think we need to, as charities, hold really strong boundaries there. But I do think it is important to be specific in what you want. And the other thing I would add is, especially if you can tie it to some kind of time-bound request or an urgent reason, I think the more specificity, almost the better in those cases, because you're being so clear that the impact that you could have by helping in this very specific way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think one that speaks to the breadth of the organisations that we have on the webinar today. Someone has asked, how can micro charities with under £20,000 a year in income realistically access corporate funding? And given how hard it is to get noticed, and I totally appreciate, particularly at that micro level, how difficult it is, but I can imagine quite a few other people on the call are feeling that too. So Amy, I don't know if you have any suggestions on this one.
Yeah, this is such a challenge. And I think kind of micro can go up to, kind of 400, 500,000 pounds a year in terms of feeling this pinch. And there is a sense that the big kind of contracts and opportunities go to those household names and the big charities that are really, kind of demonstrating their impact and have a really wide reach. I think in this instance, and at that kind of smaller end of the scale, personalization, relationships, one-to-one contact is your friend. So really lean into your micro, I would say, like capitalize on what's unique and special about you. Really build, kind of focus on investing in those one-to-one relationships, maybe the organizations on your doorstep. Going back to what I said earlier, local can be local impact, but it can also be those businesses that want to have a face and a name, maybe a location that they can come to. And I'd say that's your best bet. Don't try and compete with the big guys at the top end of the scale, and really focus on your USP, which is being a really brilliant micro charity.
Yeah, leaning into that uniqueness, and I think that speaks really nicely actually to the report that we put out this year, which is that not all businesses are FTSE 100 companies either. There is a real diversity of business, and as we can see from kind of Kat's research, we need to get the whole spectrum of kind of corporate organisations giving and feeling that responsibility with us. Kat, there was a question for you as well, which was I'd love to know more about why employee giving was excluded from the study on the total donated. Do you have any more information on your methodology on that?
Yeah, it's a good question. We had to use a framework to be able to do the B4SR one, made what most sense to us, and it doesn't include employee giving. I guess it's worth just saying that one of, if not the main reason really that we do this report is to, shall we say, encourage corporates to put their hands in their own pockets, and not to take the easy way out, which we know that they can sometimes be inclined to do. We know that there's a lot of leaning on volunteer time, which is great. It's all extremely important. We've seen that move away from cash to in kind. Okay, also very important, but we do still want businesses to actually front up their own money. So it's not in any way to take away from the importance of employee or indeed customer giving, which can be big in supermarkets, for example. That we know that they are absolutely critical, but we just don't want to make it too easy for businesses to say, well, our employees and customers are doing it, so we don't need to. But yeah, good question.
And I think that's a great way to marry up that statistic around how, so many, 70% of people think that their businesses should be doing or have a responsibility to support charities and social purpose organisations, and how we can make that really come alive at the C-suite level, as well as under employee giving. That is brilliant. Thank you so much. There were so many questions that I wish we had time for, but what we will try and do is get to as many of you as possible that have kind of left your names with those questions and see if we can just get you a little bit more information. We will also ensure that after this there will be the report itself and a recording to share with you, so you can go over even more of the statistics and the really helpful insights that Kat and our team have put together. I first just want to say a huge thank you to our panelists, to Jo, Kat and to Amy for your incredible insights into this year's report, and to everyone that has joined the call and stuck with us as we've gone over time, for showing just your characteristic grit and positive opportunism over the last year, especially, that fundraisers are so well known for. As I said, we will be sharing the report with you in full after the session, along with a feedback form about the webinar. So please do let us know what you thought, and if you have any queries about CAF's research or our wider work, please don't hesitate to get in touch. We'd also love to hear, if you enjoyed this session, what you'd like to hear from us in the future as well. We'd love to do more of these, so please do let us know if there are areas that we can support with in this style. Other than that, just a huge thank you for sticking with us. Have a lovely afternoon and happy Trustees Week to all those who celebrate.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.